Before moving to the stock exchange, Marsh served as chairman and CEO of State Street Bank and Trust Company in Boston and its parent company, which grew more than sixfold under his leadership. Before that, he was at Chase Manhattan Bank for 15 years, so he's got a long history in the financial world. He's a former Marine Corps officer, winner of the Navy Cross and the Purple Heart, and he also served as a White House Fellow for the State Department and the Agency for International Development, so he has a fair amount of government service as well. I know his military background has come out in his remarks before. He has a BS degree in civil engineering, something that those of us at Olin College are very proud of, from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He also has a master's degree in operations research and systems from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, and an MA in science, technology, and public policy from George Washington University. He's also the chairman of the board of trustees of the Boston Medical Center, and he has quite a lot of activities in philanthropy. Folks around town know of him for his leadership in giving back to the community. He's also chaired the Massachusetts Governor's Special Advisory Task Force on Massport and Logan Airport following the events of September 11th, which I think is also a sort of remarkable public service that Marsh has been involved in. I happen to also know that he's a pilot and he loves airplanes, so you might hear something about that from him too. Anyway, welcome, Marsh.
Having graduated from college in 1962, I'm now in my 47th year in the workforce, and I'm continuously amazed at how we arrived at this point of widespread uncertainness about many of our largest financial institutions, less than enthusiastic support for many of our government's actions, and serious concern about the near-term job prospects and economic outlook. The current economic crisis, or mess, and there doesn't seem to be a better word than mess when you dig into what actually caused it, raises serious issues for this course. What is the future of capitalism, and can you be confident that ethical behavior and historical norm in American business will be the norm of the future? What's the relationship between the leadership of a business and its ethics? And finally, what can you look forward to when you join the workforce, a few short months for some of you in the future, and how do you choose a company or industry that holds leadership and ethics in high regard? In a recent New York Times column, Ben Stein, the financial analyst, wrote of the standard of care that financial institutions should exercise. And I quote, "Without trust, there can be no free market capitalism. Capitalism took root in Europe when wealthy families had excess income to invest, and they entrusted their money to managers who would treat their funds with due care. Such standards of care required that those handling someone else's money behave with extreme rigor and honesty. The standards, which came to be known as fiduciary duty, were the same duty a court required of, say, a trustee dealing with the property of a widow or a child. Trustees always had to behave with the interests of the trustor uppermost. There could be no conflict of interest or even the appearance of one. Every relevant fact about an investment and a trusteeship had to be disclosed. As the law came to be interpreted in the United States, the trustee had to disclose every fact or belief that might influence an intelligent, reasonable investor. These laws were codified in state and federal courts after revelations of stock market corruption before and during the stock market crash of 1929, a period that saw, in 1934, the formation of the Securities and Exchange Commission, today's SEC. There could be no material deception and no scheme or artifice to defraud. The investor's interests always had to be superior to those of the investment bank, financial advisor, or broker. For a good long time after World War II, the laws of fiduciary duty were observed. But by the 1980s, the law started to break down in a major way. There had been small scandals in the 50s and 60s, but by the end of the 80s, the Drexel Burnham, Michael Milken junk bond scandals had exploded, revealing that deception was routinely practiced against the buyers of junk bonds. Then came the closely related savings and loan scandals, leaving taxpayers defrauded in a major way. Then we weathered the high-tech scandals of the late 1990s, in which the bluest of the blue-chip brokerage firms and investment banks placed excessive valuations on companies that they peddled to their investors. Well, that's a helpful context, but how did we get here? When the Wall Street Journal publishes a list of 25 major U.S. firms, as they did a couple of years ago, that have had ethical lapses, starting with Adelphia and ending with Xerox, we know we have a challenge to reestablish American capitalism and business as based on sound leadership and ethical behavior. And we must do this in a rapidly changing environment where we have seen over the past few years to favor Wall Street-based financial transactions over a company's basic commercial operation. Now, business leaders at all levels, not just the CEO, have specific responsibilities that fall into three areas: ethical, legal, and economic. And here, economic means the company's business model. They are expected to make their decisions balancing the demands of all three. Their decision must balance all three simultaneously. However, as the Wall Street Journal list shows, things weren't that well balanced. The 1990s were to some extent the go-go years. You had the longest bull market in history. You had an internet explosion and IPOs that produced instant millionaires. You had merger mania. You had a focus on corporate earnings. You had a focus on rising stock prices and celebrity CEOs with trophy wives. I never could figure out how to get a trophy wife after 10 years as a CEO. Everyone seemed to want to get rich, have an advantage over another company through earnings and IPOs, or be perceived as a great corporate leader as measured by their salaries, lifestyles, and stock holding or options. Corporate boards of directors were often accused of lackadaisical oversight and ignorance of conflicts of interest. One result was the very, sometimes perceived as onerous, Sarbanes-Oxley law that attempted to right the governance of corporations through additional controls. And to some extent, what we see looking at 5,000 companies around the world is it seems to be working. Bigger questions and issues for your discussion in the seminar are along the lines of what's the correct metric for corporate leaders? Clearly, large amounts of salaries, bonuses, stock options, performance shares are part of the problem, not part of the solution. But they do have the advantage of being easily measurable and quantifiable. What about the ethical and economic metrics of a company? How do we or can we quantify those? Is the new trend to measure or assess corporate social responsibility going to be sufficient? And I think Dr. Schlesinger talked at some point in the course about that. Okay, as we look to the future, your century, first of all, you all will probably work for 6 or 7 companies, not the 3 or 4 of your parents' generation or the 1 or 2 of my pre-baby boomer generation. These companies will also look quite different and will actually require more leadership and an increased focus on values and ethical cultures because they will probably be global companies and will have to balance varying norms of behavior around the world. 20th century, last century companies were structured to be bureaucratic, multi-leveled, organized with the expectation that senior management would manage and command and control their operations. They were characterized by policies and procedures that created many complicated internal interdependencies. They had limited horizontal control issues. 3 of these people reported to 1 of these, and 3 of them reported to 1 of those. You could actually manage and lead face-to-face, because of their control environment and the narrow spans of control. The cultures were inwardly focused, centralized, slow to make decisions, political, risk-averse. These companies thrived in the manufacturing world of the 50s and 60s, but with 77% of the U.S. economy now being the service sector, we'll see a different approach this century. The 21st century companies are structured to be non-bureaucratic, with fewer rules and fewer employees, limited to greater spans of control, fewer levels of management, organized with the expectation that senior management will lead and lower-level employees will manage specific tasks, characterized by policies and procedures that produce dedicated and vertically structured organizations to serve their customers. The culture will be probably externally oriented and global, empowering to junior and lower-level employees, much quicker to make decisions, open and candid and encouraging dissent, more risk-tolerant of business risk. So how will your leaders act, and how will they establish an ethical culture in these companies? And how do you evaluate them as a place to work when you go into the workforce in a few months? The leaders of these companies must be totally committed to ethics and leadership. Being totally committed yields dramatic results for several reasons. First, it proves that the goal is worthwhile and important, and it confirms that the leader isn't going to quit before the objective is achieved. Second, the most effective leaders at all levels will take the time to ensure that the values are believed throughout the company or the organization. This is especially as important as companies decentralize to face their specific markets and serve the global marketing effort. These leaders must develop and encourage a shared sense of the organization's goals and purpose throughout the company. They must ensure open and candid discussions. They must encourage the autonomy of their subordinates to achieve their goals. They must establish the high ethical standards, including some practical cases spelled out and easy to understand. And in the seminar, I'll show you how some companies distribute their ethical standards in a small booklet to their employees. They also must take action to ensure the leaders and executives are a role model for all employees, including good and bad examples. So before going to work, you must satisfy yourself through research that the company is truly committed to strong leadership and ethics. So let's shift our focus a little bit to personal ethics. While what I've said about the business leadership environment is interesting, we're also in an area of much greater legal, market, regulatory, and public scrutiny, and the responsibility will fall on all employees to act ethically. Most of you won't be a CEO in the next few years, so what's your personal and ethical leadership challenge, and how can you meet this challenge at whatever level you work? You must first always act and think ethically, that is, creating and living to a moral culture within your business or activities, not to mention within the law. While you can make a case for various interpretations of accounting rules in the cases like Enron and WorldCom, the actual acts contained illegal events designed to defraud. Second, you'll find that it's often not the large, possibly illegal act that occurs when you are young and just entering the workforce. It's more like these examples, which I'm going to go over. These are events that I have seen personally or been involved with or that happened to me. I'll save the actual outcome for our seminar discussions. It's also often difficult to tell exactly what is the illegal act, if any, in these examples. Your company would like to be involved in the underwriting of some municipal bonds, but to do so, you have to pay to play and contribute $5,000 to a fundraising breakfast for the mayor. Pretty expensive eggs. Do you go along with this, thinking everybody does it? It's a standard market practice? Or do you stand your ground and say, this is buying business? You hire a new person from a competitor. He or she arrives the first day of work with a copy of the competitor's numbered and confidential strategic plan. Is this windfall business intelligence or theft? You are asked to evaluate a customer or a company that you know has potential for a large business relationship with your company, but that company is highly sensitive to criticism. So you are tempted to ease off on your analysis to hopefully gain business for your company. You work in some form of brokerage stock trading operation and have a chance to trade ahead, so-called front running, in front of a more favored customer because you'll get favorable prices. Or you have a trade where a mistake is made. Do you pass that on to the customer or swallow it yourself? Or it's 2 minutes past the deadline for posting mutual fund trades, but your supervisor comes by with a stack of trades from a large mutual fund company with the comment, "Your watch is fast. These are from our biggest customer." Or in my case, as a 26-year-old junior Marine Corps officer commanding 225 men in combat, I'm asked to verify enemy dead. But to do so will place my troops in very dangerous circumstances. Here the metric was body count. Do I obey higher officers who are many miles to the rear and protected in heavy bunkers, or send my troops out just to enhance some colonel's metric? You work for a college that does government research. This is not Wellesley, Babson, or Olin. A senior person at the college is getting married on campus, and you're asked to include some of the wedding expenses in the normal government research overhead charges. That's an actual case. You're asked by the CEO of your company to pay annual bonuses in December, not February, because there is a new income tax bill that becomes effective on January 1st. And would subject the bonuses to a significantly higher rate of tax for the executives. You have an employee who is terminally ill, but he was on his spouse's health care plan, not our company's, and it's out of money. It reached the payout limit of $150,000. Do you put him on your company's plan during open enrollment, even with this serious prior condition? He's terminally ill, and you know that. You are leaving a Middle East country to fly to London, but to depart, you have to give the airport manager $100 to get you on a full flight that has empty seats. How do you put that bribe on your expense report? So where are we? First, leadership is always tightly linked and inextricably tied to ethics. The leaders of any organization at all levels, be it business, NGO, nonprofit, academic, or whatever, must set and maintain the ethical tone. Second, the actions that are illegal are usually straightforward. It's the gray areas often occurring in your day-to-day activities that require your personal ethical compass. Third, we unfortunately don't seem to have a lot of recognizable and noteworthy national role models, or at least they don't get the same level of scrutiny as the bad role models. I'm sure they're out there, and I wish they would speak up.